Hey, it's Kay. Welcome back to my channel. So, like everybody else right now, I am also on the Project Hail Mary hype train. I just finished reading this book this past weekend, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it so much. I am not a huge sci-fi person, but I thought that the writing was easily digestible. I thought the science was really well done, but put in easily understandable terms. I absolutely loved the characters. I thought that the plot was interesting, although a little bit predictable. And yeah, I had the absolute best time reading this. I absolutely binged it. I flew through this. I think it took me like 2 days. So I had an amazing time reading this. And of course, since the movie is out, I went with my friends last night to go watch the movie, and I hated it. I went into the movie so excited because of how much I loved the book. I literally just finished it and then went the next day to go with my friends to watch the movie. And I spent the entire movie annoyed and just pissed off about the decisions that they made. And so now this is a video of me complaining about everything that they did wrong in the Project Hail Mary movie. This might be a little obvious, but in case you need the warning, this video will have spoilers for both the book and the movie. So if you don't want to see any spoilers, pause the video, come back when you've read the book and or watched the movie. My number one biggest complaint was casting Ryan Gosling as Ryland Grace. Before I ever picked the book up, I had seen a bunch of people on BookTube, on Book Talk, talking about how Ryan Gosling was the perfect casting choice, how they thought that it made a lot of sense for him to be Ryland Grace, and how they could picture him in that position while reading the book. And while I agree to an extent that the sense of humor that Ryland Grace has matches the sense of humor that Ryan Gosling has, I don't think that it was a good casting choice. While reading this book, I think I was about halfway through, I looked up and I turned to my partner and I went, I can't see how Ryan Gosling is going to pull off a nerdy, like science geek kind of character. And after watching the movie, the answer is he didn't. They eliminated every bit of nerdy, geeky, totally curious, excited about science aspect of Ryland Grace and just left the humor of it. So instead of having this guy up in space that's a well-renowned scientist, a like scientific rebel of sorts, and a guy who's incredibly smart and you can kind of trust to solve all of these problems, you have a random schmuck that they picked off the street up in space with all of humanity depending on him. I did not believe for 1 second that Ryan Gosling was smart and that he could be trusted to do the things that were expected of him. And partially I think that's because of what they had to work with. A lot of this book, especially in the beginning, is watching Ryland Grace figure things out. The slow process of experimenting and doing all of the math and trying to figure it out or whatever, and how piece by piece things are starting to click, and as things click for him scientifically, he starts getting more memories that help give more context for more things to click scientifically. And you can see the process that his brain is doing through the book. But in the movie, there was no scientific process shown at all. You get the scene where Strat comes in and is like, hey, I want you to look at this astrophage. But there's no true explanation of why did they choose this man? This guy is a middle school teacher. Why did they choose him of all people to look at the astrophage? They like flashed the paper that he wrote with one line, with like 2 lines about it, of how he wrote a paper about how life could exist without water. But there was nothing on like oh, we could trust him with the science. He's smart enough to do this. Like, there wasn't much discussion of like what he was doing before writing this paper, why he switched from academia to teaching, and how the only reason he really switched was because everyone got mad that he called people a bunch of idiots in his paper. And then when you put him in the lab, they skip through all of the scientific process, and all they show is just him bumbling around the lab until he accidentally stumbles into something. And even the conclusions that he came up with came from a random security guard watching him outside and not from like his own brain. And so it's just like two randoms stumbling into solutions, randomly finding out like, oh yeah, this is how the astrophage reproduce. This is why they're moving back and forth. Like, we don't get any of the science background of why it's happening and how that happens. Then we get onto the ship. They totally fast forward and make a complete joke of him waking up from the coma. Actually, this was the first scene in the movie, but whatever. They made a complete joke of him waking up from the coma. You expect me to believe that 4 years in a coma, he can immediately use all of his limbs, like very first second, he can immediately use all his limbs, climb up multiple ladders up to the top of the rocket. He can easily figure things out. The only thing that's not working is his ability to speak. Every other muscle in his body works perfectly fine and is totally used. Like, it only takes like a couple seconds for it all to fix itself. Like, no, that's not believable. It skips the part where he messes around in the science, in the lab, in the rocket, and figures out that gravity is stronger than normal, and that's how he figures out that he's in space. Everything that happens in the rocket, he just stumbles into it. He stumbles into finding out he's in space because he happens to see out the window. He doesn't have to do any solving in the very beginning. And so when we get to the heavier problems, the more intricate problems of how do we collect them? How do we figure out why this is killing the sun but not Tau Ceti? How do we then use that to solve Earth? I don't trust Ryan Gosling to figure it out. I don't trust him. Nothing about the movie established that this is a character that I can trust to solve Earth's problems. He just looks like a bumbling idiot. And like, the humor is there, but it's a sci-fi movie. It's a sci-fi book about the apocalypse, the end of the world. And you can't just expect me to believe some random dude they pulled off the street is able to successfully do all of this. There was no reason to dumb him down. First issue I had is Ryan Gosling could not pull off the super intelligent, geeky, nerdy, curious scientist and just looked like a random schmuck that they pulled. Even when Strat was like, here, I'll leave you 3 astrophage, there was no logical reasoning for her to have left him 3 astrophage. In my mind, in the movie, he didn't earn it, he didn't work for it, he didn't fight for it. He was just kind of handed it as plot convenience. This pattern continues throughout the movie of not seeing why Ryland Grace is there. Why did they choose Ryland Grace to be there? Why does he continue to get to be there? While in the book, you see that Strat keeps him as like her right-hand man and just brings him into every single conversation, has him in the lab constantly, and he figures out multiple things that other people aren't figuring out, and she asks for his opinion about literally every step of the process. You don't get that in the movie. He just happens to be hovering nearby on different conversations and like brought in a little bit, but not really, just brought to kind of teach the scientists. There wasn't enough rapport for me to trust him to be teaching these scientists. Like, the whole Ryland Grace thing just pissed me off. He was nothing like what I was picturing him as in the book. He was a lot more nerdy. He was like a very curious science person, like a science nerd, science geek, and I absolutely loved it. My nerdy self, that was the reason why I kept flipping page after page reading this book, was because I was obsessed with how he would go through different experiments and how his brain worked in processing the science, explaining everything that goes behind all the decisions that they made. And they took all of that out of the movie. Similarly, they dumbed down Rocky as a character as well. Rocky is established to be a mathematical genius. He's a god-tier engineer. Ryland asks for literally anything. Grace asks for literally anything. And Rocky's like, oh, no problem. I got you. I can build that immediately. Rocky goes off, builds the little thing, and then gives it to Grace and is like, here, it's for you. None of that was really shown. I was talking to people who haven't read the book, and they were kind of asking me about Rocky and didn't really understand Rocky's character and why Rocky was there and why it was important that they included him. And I'm like, oh, Rocky was the engineer. Rocky was how things were going to get done, because as much as Grace had the smarts to figure things out, he needed things to be built up there to help him solve different problems. And Rocky, the engineer that he was, built the tools and machines that Grace needed to do his science. And it was a give and take relationship. Grace explained all the science concepts that Rocky didn't understand and didn't know about, and Rocky built all the tools and machines that Grace could only hope to have dreamed of. The tank farms were brushed over, they just happened to be there in the movie. The sample collector didn't function the way that it functioned in the book, when I thought the way that it functioned in the book was so cool. He tailored it to open at the right pressure and then close at the wrong pressure, and it's just all automatically engineered in there. You didn't need any possible human issue, like there was no potential for human error or anything when it comes to collecting at the right time, because the device that Rocky engineered just did it by itself. Like, that's so cool. The fact that Rocky is just mathematically way better, has really good memorization, like memorization way beyond human abilities, all of that just wasn't mentioned in the movie, which made it really confusing of like, how does Rocky just happen to understand English? How is this conversation working? Because we get how Ryland understands what Rocky is saying, but how do we know that Rocky understands what Ryland is saying? You didn't take the minute or two to explain that Rocky is just that good at picking shit up and has an unparalleled memory and can just recall stuff like that. He's great at looking at patterns and great at picking up different sections. You completely brushed over the fact that Grace was able to understand Iridian without looking at the computer, and that they both kind of picked up each other's languages for the most part. Like, the whole language building thing was so cool, and figuring out each other's translations and what each word translated to was so interesting in the book. And it was all just, again, done away with like plot convenience. Every cool scientific aspect was just completely brushed over, and it all felt like plot convenience. It didn't feel like actual thought out things. It felt like, oh, this is just solving itself because we need it to solve itself. I feel like Rocky was dumbed down because Grace was the main character. It felt like the filmmakers, the writers, whoever, the directors, I don't know, whoever was in charge of making film decisions looked at the relationship between Grace and Rocky and could not fathom that a non-human entity could be equal or better than a person, when in the book they are very much equals, and at times Grace is even saying that Rocky is better than he is. But you got none of that in the movie. In the movie, they dumbed Rocky down and just made him a like cute little sidekick character. You didn't get to see how genius Rocky is in his own right. You didn't get to see Grace's genius, and you really didn't get to see Rocky's genius. And it was so upsetting. It was so upsetting. Into more like specific plot details, there were specific plot things on top of these character choices that they made. There were specific plot things that really irritated me as well. And I understand that some of these weren't included because it's difficult to show on screen. Like, how would you translate these scenes, these explanations on screen? But some of it I think could have been included with like one or two more throwaway lines. Instead of having it in like a throwaway joke, you put it in as like a minute or two conversation. The people who really understand science will get it, and the people who don't understand science will be like, I don't really know what they're talking about, but that was a funny joke in that conversation. But at least the explanation is in there. Let me be more specific. One of the main plot points of Project Hail Mary was the fact that Talmiba, the predator to astrophage, cannot tolerate nitrogen. It can't handle nitrogen gas. It dies immediately. That was one of the main plot points, main issues of Talmiba. And so Grace goes through the process of naturally selecting and breeding up nitrogen-resistant Talmiba. But the explanation for one, why he needed to do this in the first place, as in the fact that Venus has 3 point whatever percent of nitrogen in its air, and Rocky's planet, what was it, Arid, had 8.5 or so percentage of nitrogen in its air. Those two wasn't brought up at all. Rocky's planet, not brought up in the slightest. But even Venus's atmosphere makeup wasn't really mentioned. On top of that, you don't have the reasoning of why does Grace have so much nitrogen in the first place? Why does Grace have the tanks to breed the Talmiba in the first place? You don't see any of that. You don't get that explanation. They just show the tanks, and he's like, look, I bred a bunch of Talmiba for you so you can take some home, when Rocky is the one who built those tanks. He's the reason they have the tanks in the first place. And then the nitrogen gas, the fact that Dubois wanted to die by nitrogen gas because it is the most peaceful and painless death, wasn't even mentioned. But they had enough time to put a throwaway line in there about Ilyukina wanting to die by heroin. Like, you could throw in the heroin line as a joke, but couldn't throw in a line about Dubois wanting to die by nitrogen? That literally explains why he has tank after tank of nitrogen on the ship. And he needed that to solve the Talmiba problem. They very briefly brushed over the Talmiba evolution problem and how it got into the rest of the ship. There's a scene where Grace is being crushed by the pressure, and Rocky exits his enclosure and saves Grace and then passes out in the ship. But in the movie, instead of just having Rocky pass out in the ship and letting Grace then go try to save Rocky in return, they have a scene where Grace is knocked out. Rocky drags Grace across the ship all the way to the bedroom, to the dormitory, hook him up to the bed with the robot arm, and then somehow manages to bring himself into his enclosure to then try to recover. When he's outside his air, he literally can't survive in Grace's atmosphere. Like, you're expecting me to believe that Rocky survived for the 15 minutes or so that it took for him to save Grace, relocate Grace to a different location in the ship, and then also save himself? And then on top of that, you didn't give Grace the opportunity to try and save Rocky? It made me so mad because it's not believable. It's not believable. I feel like a lot of the choices that they made, instead of just taking the explanations that are put, you didn't even have to like think or try to come to your own conclusions on how things happened in the book in Project Hail Mary. It's all written out and spelled out for you on paper. So instead of taking what was written directly on the paper, the full explanations on how things work and why things happened the way that it did, they took creative liberties that made the science kind of questionable in my eyes. It didn't feel believable, and it felt like everything was a plot convenience. It was plot armor that got these guys through, and not their actual capabilities. I saw something online about Andy Weir saying that his books aren't political, that he doesn't write politics into his books, reading isn't political, all of that. The Project Hail Mary movie is what I imagine Andy Weir to picture his books to be, because it took out all of the science, all of the politics, all of the social commentary, and just left a story about a man in space meeting an alien. That's what it was. And if I had gone in without reading the book, I probably could have enjoyed the movie as that, as a space movie. Even though I am not a big fan of space movies, I think I could have enjoyed the movie as just a space movie. A man in space befriending an alien because of the humor. The humor would have kept me drawn in. But the book is not a space book. It's not a man goes to space and befriends an alien book. It's a political book. We have conversations about how far the world can progress in a short amount of time when they drop political barriers, when people are willing to just work together. Scientists are willing to share information. Governments are willing to share information back and forth and just let it free flow instead of trying to compete with each other and being the first one to do it. It's literally a conversation about how the world can progress if we all just come together and work together despite our differences. There were conversations about climate change and how a whole section in the book they were debating and then ultimately decided to nuke Antarctica to force global warming to save humanity, even though forcing global warming and causing the earth to heat up a few more degrees will be devastating to the rest of Earth life. It'll mess up the oceans and the environment and everything like that. But they needed it to give Project Hail Mary more time to go out to Tau Ceti and then send the information back. They even brushed over the fact that he was supposed to send the Beatles back to Earth, and that was how he was supposed to get the information there. They showed it, but there was no mention that that was what it was. I was talking to my friends afterwards and they didn't really know what it was. They were like, "Oh, I don't really get this. Why?" I guess that was how he sent information, but why were those there in the first place? A lot of it was just brushed over. And I think taking out all of those political conversations, the societal conversations, the science aspects to it, it left a very surface level movie. I was expecting the movie to say more than it did. It had so much potential, but it all just fell flat. It felt very surface level. It felt like everything was a plot convenience, a plot armor, as opposed to natural progression of this is how things work. And I feel like they did it because they didn't trust the audience to be smart enough to pick up any of the scientific explanations. I feel like they didn't trust the audience to care about it, to understand it. And so they just took it all out. And that just left me so frustrated. It was such an interesting experience for me because I was there with my friends and my friends are crying. I can hear 2 out of the 3 of them next to me crying their eyes out. And I'm sitting there fuming because the nerdy science book that I loved so much got dumbed down beyond belief. All that to say, I don't think this was a bad movie by any means. Everyone I talked to who hasn't read the book has said that it was a really good movie. It was amazing. It was one of the best things they've ever seen. It was one of their favorite space kind of movies. They enjoyed it so much. Like I said, multiple of my friends cried during it. And so normally I would say you should read the book rather than watch the movie, or read the book before watching the movie. But I truly think that to enjoy the movie experience, you should watch the movie first. And then if you care about the science, if you care about those conversations, then read the book. Because the book goes into so much more detail. It gives a lot more depth, a lot more nuance, and just more interest and intrigue in general. I've been ranting for about half an hour now, and I spent about an hour or so ranting about this with my friend at work today, and probably half an hour ranting about it last night with my partner. So I'm gonna cut this video here. I'm sure after I finish filming and turn the camera off, I'll probably come up with a million more reasons why I didn't like this movie. But I think I'm just gonna end this video here. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. I am sorry that this was incredibly negative. Unless you really liked it, then I don't know, let me know. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about the book, the movie, whether you've done both, done one or the other, if you enjoyed it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!